Thanks for tuning in to Jets FM on the Ourlads Football Radio Network for this Black Monday, New Year's Eve, the 31st of December 2018. I'm Greg DePalma, and with the Jets offseason now underway, the Jets officially begin their search for a new head coach. We'll update the coaching possibilities, wrap up the season, and more as this edition of Jets FM starts now. Jets FM on the Ourlads Football Radio Network is brought to you by Ourlads.com, providing the best New York Jets depth charts in the industry. And now with the offseason underway for, well, I guess if you add it all up, it would be 20 teams. And because of that, there's 20 fan bases taking a look at free agency and the draft. So that's why you want to check out Ourlads.com, the NFL draft. Matter of fact, Dan Schonk and I did our first draft show, our 2019 Ourlads draft show, which is available on demand. We'll be doing many more of those as we get ready for the draft in April. And a good opportunity for you to check out exactly who's going to be available for the draft, whether it's top picks, sleepers, and more. So check out Ourlads.com. This is the peak season for the website. All right, let's welcome in my co-host for the show, Jan Levine. And Jan, we knew this day was going to come sooner or later, and I think everybody understood what was going to happen. We didn't know about Mike McCagnon. We had the idea that he was going to stay. I think you and I agree that he deserves to stay. I know there were some out there that would like to see him fired, but I think he deserves his own shot. I think he deserves his shot to hire his own coach. He has. Everybody talks about getting Sam Darnold, but he just didn't fall on his lap. He did a great move to get a quarterback that the Jets possibly haven't had since Joe Namath. I think that goes very far as credibility. He also drafted Jamal Adams, so he drafted two centerpieces on this team. And say what you want, but that is not easy to do. He's made a lot of mistakes, but he's also done some good. We'll find out if he can get the right coach, though. That is going to go a long way to determine the fate of this franchise.
Agreed. I mean, I think we talked about it a couple times. McCagnon's record is clearly spotty. He has struggled in terms of the draft and made fairly significant mistakes in terms of over the years. So absolutely no question about that. We can question the big dollar free agents he signed. I mean, Trumaine Johnson, who got benched yesterday, hasn't worked out. Morris Claiborne didn't have a particularly good year. You look at some of the other guys that he signed. So I think there's no question we can question his capabilities in terms of as a GM. But as you also said, he did move up and wisely and smartly moved up to go ahead and go get Darnold. He drafted a tight end who we hope will be our tight end of the future for several years, who seems to be the complete package in Herndon.
Yep.
He's made other nice moves. Obviously, getting Claiborne his first year was good. But there's clearly a up and down with him. I would have not have been completely shocked if he was let go, but I'm also not surprised at all that he was brought back with him working with Chris Johnson. But we talked a lot about they need to do a much better job within the organization of structuring how the organization works in terms of the pecking order and the flow in the org chart. It's got to be the coach to the GM to the coach. That's how it needs to work. And but you also read and hear what Jamal Adams said yesterday after the game, saying they need to bring in more talent, and that solely is on the GM. That is his job. Yeah. That is why he is there. And if your own player, especially one of your elite players, is questioning the lack of talent on this squad overall, then afterwards you need to basically take him to task and say, you know what, you're not doing a good enough job. You need to be doing a much better job associated with it. You need to bring in talent. You need to bring in elite talent. You need to be using your money wisely. They didn't overall this year, but now he's got about $100 million and maybe more, depending on what they do with the squad. You better spend that money wisely, and you better bring in lots of elite talent to fix this roster.
Well, look, if he didn't draft Sam Darnold, let's just say, I don't know, let's just say it was even Quentin Nelson, who's a good player, but is not your franchise quarterback. Let's say he didn't get your franchise quarterback, Baker Mayfield or Sam Darnold, because we still don't know about the other quarterbacks. Only Darnold and Mayfield are guys that we, I think, are pretty confident are going to have successful NFL careers as a quarterback. Other guys are still questions. So if he didn't draft either guy, I think he'd be gone. I really do. I think he deserves it. I think it was almost like it could have gone either way, but I think the Darnold move, you almost have to give him a shot. Because, as I said, we've been Jet fans for. I mean, I've been a Jet fan. Well, let's just put it this way: I haven't had the opportunity to feel the way I do about a rookie quarterback on this roster, on this team, since I've been alive, and that's not an exaggeration. That's just the truth.
Okay.
And you deserve some credit for doing that. Just that. And again, making the moves to go up and get him as well. So you mentioned cap space. That is also something that people seem to forget. This wasn't like, see, I think people who want to criticize Maccagnan, and they have a lot of good points, but sometimes they get so they're so blinded by it that they don't give him credit where credit is deserved. They don't have over $100 million in cap space because Maccagnan's an idiot. They don't have $100 million in cap space because Maccagnan got lucky. This is by design. This is what he's done. So, and I also remember how many times we talked about when he got the second chance with Bowles, how I tried over and over and over again to talk about the second chance that they were getting, that you have to put a line, you have to draw the line between what Maccagnan and Bowles did those first couple of years and what they were going to do the next couple of years, because what they did the first couple of years, the entire organization was behind it. We're going to go for it. We're going to invest in older players. This was our mantra. And when that failed and they gave these guys another shot, you had to look at it like those first couple of years were just different. It was just different. This is like your new GM and your new coach. And everything, I think, was working well for Bowles until about the Bills game. Once that happened, he just lost all credibility again. He was just back to being the same old coach he has always been. He was out the door. But Maccagnan, the last 2 years, has drafted Adams. He's drafted Darnold. He's opened $100 million in cap space because that was the new plan after he got the extension. That's the way I think we have to look at Maccagnan. And now we got to look at it with fresh eyes and hope that he hires the right coach.
Well, that is the key. Hiring the right coach. I mean, Mike Ficcara wrote a really good article today in terms of the Jets no longer need to be viewing this as an entry-level position, right? It's not an entry-level position. You need to bring in a guy who brings a certain amount of gravitas to the role, and he's one of those that's a proponent of Mike McCarthy. You know my reservations associated with McCarthy,
sure.
But whoever they bring in, they need to get the right coach. And look, I personally like Bowles. I personally think you can also tell that the players like Bowles. Mm-hmm. You can also tell that what we saw from Bowles in front of the media wasn't how he was behind the scenes. And we talked about this a lot, that was a big flaw, that if he had showed a bit more of that personality publicly, it might have gone on a bit better. Again, wins and losses are always the big key. That is the thing that everybody is judged against, which, of course, because it is a zero-sum game league. And like everything in sports, you win or you lose. Very simple. If you win, they love you. If you lose, they hate you. When he was 10-5 and they were riding and they beat New England, everybody was in love with him because they expected them to make the playoffs against Buffalo. And in the last 3 years, even this year, when you've had the ups and downs with Darnold, you've also seen an organization that's turned on. I wouldn't say organizations turned on their coach, but the players, the fan base has most certainly done a 180 from where we were just before that Buffalo game and then after that Buffalo game.
Well, let's take a look and update the coaching situation because, of course, with the moves today, a new candidate has emerged, and I think he should be interviewed. I really do, and that's Adam Gase. I'm not going to hold Adam Gase responsible for what happened in Miami. I thought if you think the Jets were a potentially dysfunctional franchise, trust me, if people out there don't know, the Dolphins made the Jets look very functional. So I don't think that's any of Gaze's fault, the way that organization was run. All you got to do is take a look at one of the guys who was in charge was our cast-off, Mike Tannenbaum. So they did not run things well down in Miami. I think Gaze is still a very smart offensive coach. I don't think it's his fault that Ryan Tannehill was his quarterback. I think he did as much as he could with Tannehill because Tannehill actually played pretty good under Gaze, and I think he got the most out of Tannehill. So I think you bring him in for an interview. You try to find out what happened in Miami. and go from there. So he's in the mix. I thought it was interesting that I heard a couple of names brought up that we did not talk about recently. One was Pat Fitzgerald, which they are not going to hire because he's a defensive coach. But I bring him up because I love Fitzgerald. The problem is, again, two things. One, I just never really thought or do think that he's leaving Northwestern. I think he's a lifer. But if he does, I think it'd be great. I think he'd be a great NFL head coach. But again, he's a defensive guy, so I didn't even bring him up. But Matt Campbell's the other one. The reason I never brought Matt Campbell up is because he just got the extension. Now, yes, the Jets could go ahead and they could pay Iowa State, whatever it is, $8 million. For the Jets, it's probably peanuts. But that's the reason I didn't bring Matt Campbell up. I think Matt Campbell now definitely needs to be thrown into the mix if he's still somebody that is a viable candidate, because he's one of the very young, fresh minds in college football on the offensive side of the ball. So forget about Jim Caldwell, forget about Chuck Pagano, some of those other names. But some of the new names that we haven't mentioned, you got to throw in, again, Adam Gase and Matt Campbell to the mix. And I didn't talk too much about Tony Elliott, the offensive coordinator at Clemson. But he's also somebody I think that should deserve, potentially an interview. He's a black coach. They're definitely going to have to interview a black candidate. So if you're going to, maybe it's going to be Bieniemy. If it's not, then bring in Tony Elliott. But again, one of the other reasons I didn't bring up Elliott was because he has no head coaching experience. And as we've talked about before, that's why I think an Adam Gase, a Matt Campbell, a Josh McDaniels, a John Harbaugh, a Mike McCarthy, those are going to be the guys, I believe, and a David Shaw, which might be a long shot. Those are going to be the guys on the top of the list, and not including, of course, the guys that you mentioned, which do not have head coaching experience, and that would be Zach Taylor, who could very well be a guy at some point down the road. Not sure this is the time, but somebody that'll be a head coach someday.
Well, you've run through the list, and a lot of them we talked about already. I think, as you mentioned, Fitzgerald is a guy that's gotten some pub lately. I don't know if he'll leave Northwestern, but he will be a guy that a lot of teams are interested in. I think we touched on Campbell last week very briefly. He's going to get an enormous amount of play. He's been shooting up the list. The Clemson coach, first of all, thanks for reminding me about Clemson Notre Dame. I really needed to hear that, so very much appreciated. I'm trying to still lick my wounds after that debacle from that game, but what he's done with a pure freshman quarterback and the team around him has been nothing short of spectacular. We talked about Zach Taylor as one of the guys that I wanted to bring in, a young guy, worked with Goff, has gotten the best out of him as a QB. Would love to see what he can potentially do with Darnold also. He's a guy that's going to get a lot of publicity. I know from seeing the list today, and we talked about today being Black Monday, and there's been coaches fired right and left today. Mike McCarthy seems to be a guy that's getting a lot of publicity. McCarthy's a lot of guys getting a lot of publicity. He's been rumored for a bunch of jobs, and we talked about McCarthy and what's going to happen with him. So there's a lot of available options. Bruce Arians, another guy who supposedly is out there, but the rumor is that he may only be interested in the Browns job if it becomes available. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be a very interesting couple of weeks with all of the candidates that are out there and all of the teams now looking to hire coaches, with Arizona, with Green Bay, with Miami, as you talked about, with Gase being let go, with Denver now with Vance Joseph being let go. There is a ton of guys that have been kind of let go. That's going to be that. Not all the jobs are at the same level or the same ilk, but it's something where you're going to have a lot of teams looking for guys and a lot of guys that are in the overall mix that are going to be considered. That the Jets really need to be smart, but need to be targeted and need to be maybe potentially a little quick in identifying the guy that they want and grabbing him before somebody else has an opportunity to do so if it's somebody they really want.
Yeah, and I didn't even bring up Lincoln Riley, obviously, because of what his statement was before the game last week. Now, whether or not he was just saying that before the big game, who knows? Anybody could change their mind, but we'll find out, sure enough, now that his season's over and that teams are going to be asking around for interviews and things of that nature. Of course, if he was willing to take an interview, then you would get the feeling that he's serious about coming into the NFL, and he'll be at the top of the list of a lot of franchises. What the Jets have going for them, contrary to what Bart Scott is going to lead you to believe, is that the Jets have a lot of really good they got a lot of good assets going for them. They have, again, you could throw in the cap space. You could throw in the quarterback. You could throw in New York. And you could say what you want about the Jets look like at times. They could be a little dysfunctional here and there. But we've talked about this before with Woody Johnson, too. Where is Woody Johnson? Woody Johnson we haven't even heard of Woody Johnson. And yeah, you could say what we want about his son, Chris, and that he's running the team. But do we ever really even hear of Chris? No. So what does that tell you? I mean, that tells me that if I go to New York and I got $100 million in cap space with my GM to spend on, and I've got a young quarterback that could be a great one to tutor, and I'm in freaking New York, which means I'm going to have all sorts of different possibilities outside my regular contract. And I get an owner that's not going to be a Badinsky, which is extremely important in the eyes of coaches that are going to make this type of decision and go, oh, do I want to go there? Do I want to go to Cleveland? Well, if I go to Cleveland, why would I want to go there? Oh, I mean, that is dysfunctional. So people have to understand this. The Jets could be a little bit dysfunctional, but they're not Cleveland dysfunctional. They're not Miami dysfunctional. It gets overblown because it's the New York market and they want to rip the Jets for this and that, but they're not. Dysfunction starts at the top. And Woody Johnson is not a dysfunctional owner. Has he made mistakes? Sure. Is he a football guy? No. But does he butt into things as far as every day, what goes on with the team and the coach and the GM? No, he does not. That's really where dysfunction starts, is when you meddle with the coaching staff and the GM. That's something that does not happen in New York. So contrary to Bart Scott and others, this is a very good opportunity for head coaches. And I think the Jets are going to get, depending on what their pecking order, and I certainly hope the pecking order is along the lines of what we've talked about. If it is, they're going to get one of, if not the best candidate available. I have no doubt about that.
I agree with you, but I do think you also have to take into account the comments that Adams made where everybody needs to be on the same page. And that has to be mildly concerning because it's the view that is not necessarily the case, that maybe there are some factions in the organization or in the locker room that maybe aren't pulling the same rope, to use Adams' expression. And that's the thing that I think needs to kind of be dissected, evaluated, and then determined as to what Adams really meant and who he's referring to. And this is something to me that McCagnon needs to get involved with and make sure he fully understands it. And then if they need to, get Chris Johnson involved also and make sure that he understands it so that everybody is on the same page in the organization. Look, you have your starting quarterback who we all believe can lead us hopefully down the road to the promised land, and he's on a rookie-level contract. You have your starting tight end who also is on a rookie-level contract. So there's a lot of money that's available because you have two key components associated with it that are on rookie-level contracts, especially your starting quarterback. Here's where we need to maximize that contract and make sure you bring in the right guys. And that's on the job of the GM and on the owner to make sure why is everybody not on the same page, and now what do I need to do to make sure everybody is on the same page, and who do I need to bring in to move that?
Well, I think that starts, first of all, Jamal Adams, I think from a player's perspective, especially how busy the player is going to be, what is he really going to know? Well, he's going to know the coach, and he's probably going to know a little bit also about the GM. That's what he's going to know. I mean, what is the office? When he goes to the office once in a while to pick up a check or something, is that dysfunctional? I mean, so I think that is where when you cut the ties from Bowles and McCagnon, which is something that we all agree should never have happened. They should never have been hired together. The GM should pick the coach. And as soon as that didn't happen from the very get-go, we knew there would be a level of dysfunction between who's in charge. How can you say McCagnon's in charge over Bowles when they both were brought in together? I believe that's where a lot of the dysfunction comes from as far as these players are concerned. They want to know who's in charge. Who's the guy that's leading the ship here? Well, now they know. Now it's McCagnon. So, yeah, I agree with you 100% that now it's McCagnon's job to make sure that this ship is sailing the right way. Fact is, I can understand where some of the players might have been before as far as some dysfunction. And I also think that the coaching staff has a lot to do with it. I just do. And now that coaching staff is gone, as soon as he brings in, hopefully, the right coach, all of that dysfunction is potentially and hopefully going to go away. But that's the whole idea about bringing in a really good coach. You bring in a really good coach, a firm coach, a coach that has been there before. That's why we've talked about you can't hire guys like Eric Bieniemy, and I believe you can't hire Zach Taylor. You can't hire guys that have not been head coaches before. They don't understand how it's done. There might continue to be a level of dysfunctionality within the players in that locker room. So you got to bring in a guy that understands how to do it. You do that. He has command of the team, something Bowles obviously didn't have, or else Adams wouldn't have said this. Maccagnan does his job. He's the guy that's in charge of the coach, and I think everything else takes care of itself, which is, once again, the whole reason why if you just hire the right coach, I think everything else takes care of itself.
I would hope so. I mean, this is, we talked about, like, you know, organizationally, the dual reporting to the owner was kind of ridiculous. I don't know why that was the way the structure was set up initially. It's not something that most teams follow. Now, look, Maccagnan needs to get A, the coach right, B, free agency right, and C, the draft right. And honestly, if he fails on any one of those three, or more precisely, doesn't necessarily hit a home run with all three, probably, he's going to be the next one that's out the door looking for a job, because there's only so many times you can give him opportunities and kicks at the can before you go, you know what? It's not the coach now. You've now brought in your own guy. It now has to be the GM, because we haven't added the talent that we need to add to make sure that we're at the right level. And here's where the rubber meets the road. And guess what, Mike? You're going to be the guy now that you're going to be held a feet to the fire, because if everything is reporting up through you, the win and loss record is now going to be on you. It's on you already, but you can blame the coach a little bit. Now you have the guy that you wanted to bring in. Now that win-loss record is on you, and if it's not necessarily a major uptick from this past year and the team is in playoff contention this upcoming year, then you're the one that's going to basically be the one that's shown the door.
Yeah, that's why, why I threw out a guy like David Shaw, because I think it's going to be a tricky situation where you're going to have to not only get a guy with head coaching experience, but I think they are going to have to go more towards a guy that does understand how to run like a CEO. And I think that's what David Shaw has been able to do, following in the footsteps of Harbaugh there at Stanford. Stanford, an educational school. There's a lot to juggle there. It's not easy to win there. So that's why I think that's why I even look at a guy like Matt Campbell and I go, okay, he's got head coaching experience, but I'm still, I still think he's kind of a question mark guy. So, okay, can he get a job at Ohio State, which I think would have been his dream job? That's one thing, but getting a job in the NFL is completely different. John Harbaugh, I'm sorry, but look, Baltimore was smart with what they did, but you in no way, the way this franchise is right now, the Jets are you offering the Baltimore Ravens some sort of high draft pick to get John Harbaugh? No way. All right, the Jets don't even have a second-round draft pick this year. So what are they going to give him, a first-round draft pick? I mean, get the heck out of here. So John Harbaugh is not coming to the Jets if that's what they're going to be asking for. And I can't imagine they're going to ask for anything less than a second-round draft pick. So I'm sorry, you're just not going to do that for John Harbaugh. He's not Jim. I'm sorry, he's just not. He's a good coach. I'd like to have him in New York if he's still available, but I'm not giving up high draft picks for John Harbaugh, especially if Marty Morningweg's coming with him as the offensive coordinator.
Yeah, and I don't think that, given that they just made the playoffs and with Lamar Jackson there, I don't think he's going anywhere anyway.
I agree.
I think that's kind of a quote-unquote pipe dream in terms of bringing him on board, especially now because of the fact that
they got a nice thing going.
The playoffs. They seem to have their quarterback of the future also.
Yeah.
And you look at this year's draft with the guys that were brought on board, and a lot of people were very high on Jackson even during the draft. And I know a lot of people feel that the Giants made a major mistake while everybody likes Will Hernandez. They should have been even more aggressive to trade up into the back end of the first round once Jackson started to slip and grabbed him as their QB of the future. Because if they had done that and been able to move up and get Jackson, you look at Jackson and Barkley, that would have been one heck of a combo for them for the future.
Yeah, well, whether Pat Shurmur is the type of offensive guy that could put that together, that's one thing. And we still don't know about Lamar Jackson. We'll find out in the next couple of years once the NFL digests game film and understands how they got to stop him in his running game. And if they could stop his running game, he's just not going to be a really special quarterback. So. And can he be healthy running around like that the whole career? So I still have some reservations on him, but I agree with you. Your whole point about Harbaugh now winning the game that gets them to the postseason, I'd be shocked that he doesn't re-up for at least some term in Baltimore. But anyway, Josh McDaniels is definitely near the top of the list, but the big question we, of course, are going to have is would Josh McDaniels even interview with the New York Jets knowing the disdain from Bill Belichick? Look, Eric Mangini came here. So anything's possible.
Then he got blackballed basically by Belichick by coming there.
Yeah, so anything's possible. But the other thing is any organization that's going to interview Josh McDaniels, that's also going to be very tricky after what he did for the Colts last year. So
I think he's going to have major questions to answer, and I think even if he does sign somewhere, until he actually shows up for the press conference and takes the job, you're going to be questioning as to whether or not he's actually going to end up as your head coach. And again, he'll probably be able to explain that to a certain extent based upon reservations in terms of taking the role. But he's look, it's actually kind of worked out pretty well for the team that he ditched in terms of letting him not showing up there. I think.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And he's probably better off anyway if he gets whatever job he's going to get, which I still believe Josh McDaniels, the reason he did that is because I think he's just going to be patient more than likely. In the next 2 or 3 years, he'll be the Patriots coach. I got to believe that's why he did that.
I would assume that's the reason why he hung around, is he got some assurances that he is the next in line. But as we all know, just because you've gotten those assurances doesn't mean anything.
All right, so we should find out within the next week or two who the Jets head coach is. They're gonna have the opportunity, of course, to interview all the assistant coaches that are still out there in the playoffs. Then it's just going to be up to, if they do zero in on one of those assistants, chances are they're going to have to wait, of course, for the playoffs to be over. And then when the playoffs are over, so if they wind up, let's just, for instance, say they like Eric Bieniemy. Eric Bieniemy might want, and let's say the Chiefs are in the Super Bowl, Jets might have to wait for Bieniemy to be out of the Super Bowl for them to officially hire him. Not that that's a big deal, because, but it's just a point to bring out. So anyway, it should be real interesting. This is a great time, again, as we've said for the longest time here on this show this season, that to be a Jet fan. The third pick in the draft is now set. So the Jets are going to get a great opportunity to draft a really premium talent. Unfortunately, Herbert went back to college. That's a bad thing. So that means that other teams aren't going to be moving up and drafting a quarterback like that. Now, Haskins maybe, could be, possibly, if a team is desperate and they want to, if he comes out, let's hope that he winds up as a first or second pick in the draft. That moves one of those top defenders down to number 3. And then also something we haven't talked about enough before I let you go, Jan, and that is the new uniforms. I think another reason, might a small reason, but another reason Bowles was let go. This is just a completely new, fresh start for the organization that we have never seen as fans. The combination of franchise quarterback, $100 million in cap space, third pick in the draft, and to top it off, fresh new uniforms.
Again, I like the fresh new uniforms. I'm curious to see the direction in which they go and what they look like. I'm not necessarily hanging my hat on that being the end-all and be-all and a reason why, but I do agree with you. It is a fresh new start. It's a new look. You have a new quarterback. You're quote-unquote starting anew, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
Now let's see what happens from there.
All right, Jan, appreciate it. We'll be back on at some point in the next couple of weeks when we hear it's official, as soon as we find out who the next Jets coach is, or whenever something else big happens. And I'm sure the next big news story will be their next head coach. We'll talk again.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Jan. All right, that's Jan Levine. And so, by the way, we'll get Randy Lang back as well at some point. Once we find out the whole new coach deal. As I've said for the past month or two, just didn't want to have Randy on, considering he works for the Jets, with all this bad karma happening within his own organization that he works for. I'm not going to put him on the spot for anything like that, because that's kind of all we've talked about here for the past 6 weeks or so has been change, and especially at coach and so forth and so on. But once we know who the new coach is and that direction turns for everything new that I just mentioned, then we'll get Randy back on, get his perspective and so forth and so on. So, and I think it's also, look, you as I've said, with what I was hearing last night on SNY, and I've said this too before, when you put a show together, and especially when you get 3 people on the show like Damian Woody, Ray Lucas, and Scott, you need to have one person out of the 3 that is going to be able to debate you. One out of the 3. You can't have all 3. Yes, I agree. Okay, I disagree a little bit on this, but I agree. Yes. That doesn't do anything, and it also shows that you just, come on, have some sort of your own vision about something completely different other than just the norm of the average person. That's not good. That's not good TV. Because if I would have been there, boy, I would have had a nice little debate with Bart Scott. Like I said, with everything he said. I mean, you just cannot talk about this roster the way it is right now and talk about dysfunction and how this is not, why would you come play for the Jets? Look at, did you hear any, I haven't heard, no, look, I haven't done a whole lot of watching them. I've admitted that, but I have lately over the past month because I knew this was happening, knew this was coming, and I wanted to, again, get a perspective from, people around the organization and so forth. I didn't remember hearing any of this stuff during the last run that they were on because they were on a nice run leading up into the Patriots. Now all of a sudden they lose 38-3 and it's an embarrassing loss and players aren't there because of injury or Todd Bowles decides to become a disciplinarian finally, which is something that we've talked about with Bowles being a big negative over the last few years. Finally decides to go ahead and let Tremaine and say, Tremaine Johnson, we're gonna sit you out. How many times did we talk about, especially the first couple of years when it had all those had all those dysfunctional players in the locker room, but wait, Jamal Adams thinks it's a little dysfunctional now. Just imagine if he was in that locker room. So you have all the dysfunction about, those veteran players and all the issues that we were hearing, and yet what was happening? Nothing was happening. Nothing. Remember, it was like, they're being disciplined behind closed doors. How many times did we talk about just sit the guy for a series? Show us that you're disciplining this guy. Of course, we want him. Hey, after what he just did, he should not play the next week. He never did any of that stuff. And so he decides on the last day of his coaching career with the Jets, he's going to discipline Tremaine Johnson. And I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again, and I'm going to keep saying this, and I'm sure I'm going to say this a dozen times or more between now and the beginning of next season. But stop ripping on Tremaine Johnson. Tremaine Johnson did not have as bad as a year as everybody's criticizing him for. Okay, has he given up big passes, a few big passes here and there? Yes, he has. Okay. Did he or did he not get injured earlier this year? Which I'm sorry, I don't care how much the guy's getting paid. When you get injured, it affects your game. And as long as he was out, you basically have to look at Tremaine Johnson in 7-8 game kind of capsule? Because there was about, for the handful of games he missed, there's no way he's back to 100% chemistry and all of that the first few games. So you got to look at the half of the season. He only had half a season with that money. But that's also why he's being criticized. The guy is being criticized for getting a big contract. And as far as McCagnon giving him that big contract, do we really have to go down this road as far as giving players that don't deserve big money, who get big money? I mean, seriously, do we have to go down that road? How much money do the Jets have, once again, in their salary cap bank for 2019? Over $100 million. So, I guess we should have had $120 million. Now, is Tremaine Johnson, can he be a number one corner on our Super Bowl team? Absolutely. Absolutely. So, if that's the case, if you basically have to overpay to get a true number one corner, he's not a shutdown, he ain't one of the best in the league, even though he's being paid by it. I mean, how long ago was it, last year, that Matthew Stafford was the highest paid quarterback in the league? And now there was rumors a couple weeks ago or last week that Matthew Stafford, maybe they need a new quarterback in Detroit. That was fast. And look at Kirk Cousins. You think he's the best quarterback in the NFL? But you overpay to get players that you need on your team. As long as you have the money, sometimes you do it. And the fact that the Jets did it with Tremaine Johnson and they still have $100 million in cap space to spend, I am perfectly fine with it, especially since he hasn't played as bad as the media wants you to believe. Okay? Am I happy about what happened this past week? Of course not. Who would be? But the good thing is, at least he was a man yesterday in the locker room. He went ahead and spoke his piece, answered a bunch of stupid questions, which is what he should have done the week before, and all of that. And you know what? I know they're talking about, well, maybe he was suspended because of missing practice Wednesday. I think it was probably that and a few other things, including what he did right after the game against Packers. I'm sure that had something to do with it. I mean, because no doubt when you do make that sort of money, you are now one of the leaders. I mean, you're brought in to be a leader at some point. You got to be one of the leaders. Now, is he the leader of the secondary? No, that's just because Jamal Adams is special. But you are still one of the leaders. You're making a lot of money. And you can't be doing that. That's all a part of making big money. You've got to talk. You've got to explain yourself. You've got to go through the good and the bad. You can't just take the paycheck and run when things aren't going well. So I'm sure that had something to do with it. But the point is that this Trumaine Johnson ripping by the New York media, like he had some sort of disastrous season, it's wrong, okay? It's wrong, okay? Trumaine Johnson did not have a disastrous season. He just didn't live up to a $77 million contract, whatever it was. And we knew he never was, because if anybody thought he was, then I'm sorry, you just don't know. And contradictory to what Bart Scott said, I think it was Scott, the Rams didn't just like, oh, yeah, here's a guy, Trumaine Johnson. They didn't even want him. That's not the way it happened. All right, the Rams felt the best way to spend our money, especially when they had to pay Aaron Donald, was we're going to bring in a few other cheaper veteran guys. We're going to bring in Talib. We're going to bring in, Dominican Sue. This is the team we're going to build. We're going to bring in, say, 4 or 5 guys that have really good, they have the potential to play really well for a year, maybe 2 if we're lucky, because we're trying to win a championship now. That's how they wanted to spend their money. It wasn't like, Trumaine Johnson, get him out of this, get him away. That was how Bart Scott kind of put it. Is we don't even want this guy. Get him away. That's not no. Okay, sorry. Especially when a team decides that they're going to give you close to $80 million, and the Rams can't afford that. So stop. Once again, this is why on shows like that you have to have somebody to debate you. Otherwise, it's ridiculous, and you just tend to, especially if you don't know better, you tend to think, they're all agreeing with each other. I guess they must be right. I guess I should now slam Trumaine Johnson because that's the authority, and they're saying that Trumaine Johnson was unwanted, overpaid, and had a lousy season. Not right. But, hey, you know what? That's what Jets FM on the Our Lads Football Radio Network is all about. And if this is the very first show that you've ever had an opportunity to tune in for, well, now you know. All right, so, again, 3rd pick of the draft. And we're going to talk a lot about that, over the next 4 months. And the Jets are going to get themselves a really good player. And they're going to get an opportunity at that number 3 pick. They could even trade out. Maybe they could be the team. Somebody wants Haskins. If he decides to come out, hey, come on, move up. Maybe the Giants and Jets can make a trade. You want Haskins, Giants? Okay, give us your pick. Give us next year's first-round pick. Give us a second-round draft pick or something like that. And we'll move down, whatever the Giants have. I don't even know what their spot is. We'll move down like 4, I don't even know where it is. Say 4 spots, 3 spots. We'll move down. And that's where we'll pick our corner or our offensive tackle. And we could also pick our pass rusher there. I'm telling you, watch. We've said it. Look, watch this Clemson, Alabama game. There are going to be some players there the Jets could pick, especially along the defensive front. So we'll talk more about that coming up. We'll talk more about the new uniforms when they're unveiled. Of course, free agency. The coaching decision is the biggest one of all here on Jets FM on the Our Lads Football Radio Network. So enjoy your new year. This is it for 2018. For Jan Levine, for Randy Lang, I'm Greg DePalma. And again, Happy New Year. Happy New Year's. Good New Year's present, Jets fans. We'll talk to you in 2019 right here on the Our Lads Football Radio Network. Alpha Mike Foxtrot.